Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video, I want to talk about the printer selections in Dynamics 365 Business Central or Dynamics NAV. So what you can see here, I'm using Business Central on-premise. I'm in the Kronos demo company. And in the printer selections, I have a few setup here. And you can see I have some setup with a blank user ID and with the report ID. And also I have some printer setup with the both the user ID and the report ID. And also I have a setup with the user ID but without the report ID. Okay, so but mostly in a customer Dynamics NAV or Business Central environment, you will see like sometimes they don't have you will never see this scenario like they put a user ID without a report ID. You will see sometimes like they have everything just a blank user ID with the report ID. And sometimes you will see for each report, they select a specific user. And so what is the printer selection used for, and how does reports print from NAV know which printer to print to? So basically on any report, so if like this report 10077, if you go to your development environment, you can take a look what's the property for that report. Let's check the number again. So it's 10077, 10077. Okay. Oh, I put a wrong number. So it's 10077. 0077. Okay, so if you search this report, sales treatment report, and you go to design this report, and you can scroll down to the bottom, find the empty line, then you control F4, then you can see the report property. So for this report property, then you will have a field saying like use system printer. So you have to check this field. So it doesn't matter if it's the base Dynamics NAV or Business Central report, or it's a custom report like you developed for your customer. In most scenario, then you will just use the default setting, which is the use system printer no. So I saw all the reports, almost all the reports that they have this setting, use system printer no. Okay, so which means if you have this use system printer set no, then it will going to use the setup in the printer selection in your Dynamics NAV or Business Central to print the report. But if you have use system printer selected yes, then it's gonna use the default printer on your NAV server. Okay, so that's the difference. So almost all the reports I see, no matter is the base reports or it's custom report, they all use this use system printer set to no. But so there's some rules for how this printer selection works. Then you can see from this URL, you can see how the printer selection rules works. So these rules is difficult to understand if you just read this text. But with combination of my examples, then it's easier to understand. So when we look at the report property, you can see this use system printer property, which I just showed you. And so most of the report is using the no option. If the no option, then the result is like, it says if this is for the report you want to print is true, then the rules in the following table apply regardless of what is set on the printer selections page. Okay, so based on the report property, if it says if on the report use system printer property, that property on your Business Central Dynamics NAV report, that property setup is true, then it will not use the printer selections. So that's what I just told you. And so if a default printer is on the computer on which the NAV server is installed, so like if your NAV server has a default printer, okay, and but your report has the use system printer property set to true, then the report is printed on the default printer. Okay, and if you don't have a default printer selected on your NAV server, which says no, then but your required property has use system printer set to yes, set to true, then you will see an arrow in your event log. Okay, in the event log of your NAV server. So this part is difficult to understand, but because we mostly our use system printer property is set to no, so you don't need to look at this part. Okay, you don't need to look at this part because in most scenarios you have to look this part. So if the use system printer property on your report is false, is the example I just showed you. From this report, you can see that property is false. Then it's gonna use the printer selection you set up. Okay, and all these rules, all these combinations, you could see something the user ID is set up and it matches the user ID, like who triggered that session to print the report. Then with the combination report ID in the printer selection matches the report ID in the background, then you're gonna, so all these, if you only look at the text, it's difficult to understand. I'm gonna explain these rules in my Business Central. Okay, so if you do not have a user ID, then which means any user who triggered the print action will print if you specify the report ID, then you specify the printer, then any user who triggered that session will print to the specified printer. If you have a user ID specified here for the report and you specify the printer, it's gonna print to that printer. But what about the users like you didn't specify here? Then the users you didn't specify here, they will gonna print to the NAV server default printer. Okay, and if you have another thing is like if you have a user set up here, but you don't have a printer, you don't have a report ID here, but you have a printer. So that will match. Let's go to our scenario here. So you don't have the user ID in the printer selection is the scenario is the user ID. We have a user ID, but the report ID is blank. Okay, so let's check. So we have a user ID, but the report ID in the printer selection page is blank. Then based on the user, so if you set up a user there, then it's gonna use the printer in the report selection page. Okay, so the report ID is blank. The report ID is blank, but you specify the user. Then it's gonna use the printer, which means for this user, for any report print for this user, it's gonna use this printer. Okay, if report ID is blank, that means all reports. So if you have a user here and the report ID is blank, then which means for this user, any report this user prints, we're gonna print to this printer. Because don't forget, our prerequisite is all the reports has that use system printer set to false. Okay, so it's not gonna use the default printer, it's gonna use the printer specified here. Okay, so then I think with this, that is easy to understand. And another scenario is like usually when you install your Dynamics NAV or Business Central, the service is running under the network service. It's under the network service. This network service usually does not have access to your printer. So if you are running this service, if you are running this Dynamics NAV or Business Central service with a service account, with a user account, and you specify that user account, for example, what I'm gonna do, I can change this property. Instead of log on with the network user, I can change this to use my EC-Advanced/JSAW. If I use that user, then you can see log on as that user. Okay, so then I specify that service account for that service here. Then it means only for the sessions triggered from that service account, then it's gonna use the printer report, and printer for the report you specify here is gonna use this printer. Usually that is used for like if you have a third-party integration, you have another integration with your Dynamics NAV or Business Central, for example, the barcode scanner, the barcode scanning system, and usually it's communicate with your NAV or Business Central through that service account, right? And then you specify that service account as a user here. So then when you print a label from your barcode scanner, then this is going through this service account and will print that report through that printer. Okay, so and there's some exceptions. For the exceptions, you can see if it's a word. I have exceptions like this. So if I specify like it's not a physical printer, this Microsoft XPS document writer is not a physical printer, it's just a driver. So it print to a virtual document, right? So then in this case, it will not print. You will not see it print. So that falls into the exception. You can see the exceptions here. Be aware of the following. So that falls into this exception. If the selected printer is not an actual printer but a driver, such as the Microsoft XPS document writer or OneNote, then the report is not printed and the background session is blocked. So it's telling you if you set up a virtual printer like this, then it's not going to print, okay? And so let's see these exceptions. If the printer that is specified on the printer selection is not installed on the computer, and then on your NAV server, then you will receive an error in the event log. So this is normal. You must to install that printer which you specified on your printer selection. If it's not installed on a NAV server, then if you specify that from your printer selection, but you didn't install it on the NAV server, then you will see the error, okay? You must to install that printer on your NAV server. So if the selected printer display a dialog box, such as request a credential or warning, then the report is not printed. So this is normal, right? So it's like even when you print to a regular printer, not from NAV, like if you're printing from your Word document and there's the printer is low, then you see an error, it's not printed. So if there's a pop, if you need to enter credential when you print, then it will be error out, will not print. This is understandable. So the user account must have access to print the specified printer in the printer selection. And by default, NAV server run under the network service. That's the scenario I talk about. So this service is running by default under the network service. This network service does not have the access to print to the network printers or local printers. So if the user account if this user account network service does not have the access to print to that printer, then the following scenarios will occur. So if there's a default printer installed for the user account, so for example, the network service, so because network service does not have access to your specified printer, then but if on your NAV server there's a default printer installed, then it will use that printer to print. It will print to that default printer. But on your NAV server there's no default printer installed, then you will receive an error in the event log. So so the last exception here is like if you want the report to print on the printer in the printer selection, but you didn't specify in the printer selection, then it will print to the default printer on the NAV server. Okay, so which means like if you want to specify, but if you wanted to print to a printer selection, but you didn't even specify the name for the printer, so that will be a scenario like this. So if I have a report 100121, okay, and I specify, I cannot use this user anymore. Let's use the test user here, okay. So if this test user report contain that, so we cannot use the same. We cannot use the same report as well. So that's use another report. So this will be, so yeah, the same report ID cannot be used twice. So that's error I'm getting. So that's good. Like we showed that. So if you want all the users to print the report to the specified printer, then you just put this to be blank instead of, because if you want user 1 to print this report, user 2 to print this report, you cannot specify the same report ID twice. So that's another issue. If you want multiple users to print this report to a specified printers, just leave the user ID blank, because you cannot use the same report ID twice. Okay, so for this scenario will be that exception. So if you do want this user to print, you want this user and want the user to print this report, then from the printer selection. But if you didn't specify the printer name there, if you have a setup here like this, then it will use the default printer from your NAV server. Okay, so I think that covers everything for printer selections. All these rules seems to be complicated, but I think the explanation, by combining it to the explanation in Business Central, the setup, then you can understand it better. So in most customers' environment, then you could see that they have usually they have a blank user ID and they have the report specified, they have the printer specified, then all the user can print that report ID to the specified printer. Okay, so thank you so much for watching this YouTube video. I hope to see you guys again next time.